I think I've got a great video for today. We're going to be taking a look at the ICOLER, I believe that's the way the name is pronounced, the Jungle Leopard Star Stone version 2. Also, branding on the box says it's the Astro V2, but it looks like a great budget option for a lot of RGB. So let's go ahead and take a look at this fan, starting off with a little bit of specs. Pretty much a bog standard 120 millimeter class fan, hydrodynamic bearing, also called fluid dynamic bearing, 0.19 amps, 1800 RPM, which is pretty good for a general purpose case airflow type fan. Airflow is rated at 58 CFM. There we go, all fixed. 2.07, 29 decibels. I apparently had a typo for that static pressure. It's 2.07. Noise level 29 decibels and rated for 40,000 hours. Before we get any further in the video, I'd like to thank ICOLER for sending over this and another sample for me to review, so thank you a lot, and I hope you all join me and enjoy the video. So we need to take some realistic expectations of this fan, where it's going to fit into a budget option for getting maximum RGB for you. So we're going to do my regular analysis, but just note that it may not perform like a top-end air cooler fan, or for even air coolers on a cooler or as a case airflow, because this fan is designed to maximize the amount of RGB glory that you like in your computer case. And it is up for you to decide where that fits on your spectrum. But we're going to go over the full video like I normally do. This is the RGB appearance for the Astro fan. So take a little explore around it. The fan is spinning at only like 30% RPM, so I'm not too worried about nicking my fingers, in case you're worrying about that. So it has a pretty nice infinity mirror, and I need to get that peel off. And unfortunately, one side has the cables coming out of it, which, I mean, I guess you're going to have one side at the front, one side at the back, but it pretty much dictates that this side is kind of the ugly side of the two. So coming back to this side, and you got that nice infinity mirror effect. The inside of the ring also has the blades look illuminated, or at least partially illuminated. Oh, that's why. It has a little light ring that goes around the inside of it that illuminates the blades rather than the blades themselves being illuminated. So that is just a different, pretty actually intriguing way of doing things. Kind of makes it a little bit more subtle overall, I guess. But of course, the whole rest of the frame here is very loud in terms of how much RGB there is in it. Before I forget, one quirk, because of the plastic housing on it, I found this fan to be a little bit wider than average, including the frame. So if your case is particularly tight, it may have a hard time fitting. Going back to the RGB, take a look at the back. You do get some after effects, but overall it's very, well, we're going to say basic. And examining the solid color. So the blades, again, aren't illuminated, but they have some illumination because of that interior ring, which is kind of cool. So in my opinion, a really cool fan like this would be take away these RGB struts, I'm going to call it, have the illumination ring right there, maybe a ring on the inside, and then have the halo around the outside. I think that would be a pretty sharp looking fan. But as it is, this looks pretty good to me if you're really into that RGB effect. The first series of tests I do is my case simulation test, and I put it into my case simulation and I take it at a bunch of key measurement locations that determine what size computer case you may be looking at for this type of fan. Next, we need something to compare against. I have a control fan that is base 3 parts A12X5 to 1 part A14 as listed up here on the graph. So just like we saw previously, and we're comparing against that control fan, this teal line, and I've got one other ICOLER fan listed on here as a cross comparison point. So the Star Stone is this lighter blue line with the circles. It's not performing particularly well. It would do just fine as in smaller cases, but as the cases get bigger, it just can't deliver that top quality airflow that I prefer to see in case airflow type designs. At 100% PWM fan signaling, the Starstone still lies behind. In smaller cases, it would do just fine, so blowing up towards your GPU, it would be perfectly adequate. but generally speaking, probably wouldn't put it as front airflow pushing air towards the back. How about comparing against other fans? So I have a wide selection here. This is my noise normalized at approximately 11 decibels. I've altered it a little bit from previously just to give a wider spectrum. So most of these fans are in the budget option, but I've also listed some high performance in the top category. So the TLS12 is my quote top rated fan, and it's also in the same sort of price category, very similar in terms of pricing for this particular fan. We'll get into pricing later on and value proposition. But like the P28 is going to be more expensive. The E12 is the same sort of price, but no RGB. The K12 is a similar price. With less RGB, the ARGB 120 has RGB, but not as stunning as this one. The closest in terms of visual, appearance, amount of light it can produce, so RGB sections on it, would be the Unifan Infinity, but is a much higher price category. So I wanted to give a wide selection for this, whereas price competitive RGB fans, as well as like the high-end performers. So it's pretty clear that a lot of these budget fans just don't have quite the same airflow because they focus most of the budget that you're getting on the RGB, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to understand where you're shifting your scale, where the purchase of the fan has gone. So moving on to showing it in a bar graph type form. So we have the Silverstone Astro in this kind of yellowish line. Down below it I have some price competitive ones listed out in green, where the TLS12 would be the top rated one, and how I calculate the average for the ranking of these fans. The TLK12 is sitting somewhere in the middle here, and you see a bunch of other fans like the P12 ARGB is also listed in here. When we take a look at my new normalized level at approximately 18 decibels, the Silverstone is still down here in this sort of bottom rank with these other fans that focus more on RGB lighting at a lower price. Taking a look at it in a bar graph form, just for simplicity's sake, for 6 and 11 inch marks. So the Silverstone is rated towards the bottom of this graph. It is one of the worst performing fans in this test, but you can see where other fans are. So one of the top picks that doesn't have the same level of RGB is the TLS12. Going at things at 100% PW fan signaling, well, it's still, the Silverstone is still, not Silverstone, Starstone is still rated towards the bottom. There are only a few fans that are worse performing than it. Again, it's a far cry from like the better fans on here, obviously. And I've added some new data points for my graphs. So I've locked in the RPM to particular ones you see at the top of the graph. So 800, 1,500, 2,000, and if it's applicable, 2,500 RPMs. And it's averaged at the 6, 11, and 14.5 inch marks. And noise level is not even a factor in this. It's just how much airflow the fan can produce at a particular RPM. So the Starstone, particularly at the 11 inch mark, doesn't really move any air. At the 6 inch mark, it does okay. I mean, you can sort of see that it does okay. So again, driving home the point that if you're not having to move the air a long distance, it does just fine. But other than that, you may be better served with something else. At 1,500 RPM, once again, very similar positioning. For smaller cases, it seems to be doing relatively fine. There are fans that do better than it, but it's doing relatively fine, especially given its noise level. It's not particularly hideous, but we'll get into the specific ones later. But bigger cases, it just can't deliver that airflow. At 2,000 RPM, it's kind of the same story, except it's kind of a farther cry from these top ones. Now, it isn't really a 2,000 RPM fan. It's rated at 1,850. My sample could spin at 1,920. So I don't know if it's a typo on their part, if I just got a golden sample or whatever. So I listed out as if it could be a 2000 RPM fan, but that it would explain why it's rated a little bit lower. Now we're taking a look at noise versus airspeed. Decibels is horizontal, airspeed is vertical. And right over here we have the Star Stone. Focus isn't true noise performance. At its maximum RPM, it's actually close to efficient. But you can see that these other fans that focus more on a low price with RGB don't really compete with a lot of these higher echelon fans. So again, it's you, the buyer, that decides what is most important to you when you're spending your money on fans. Performance, RGB appearance, somewhere in the middle. Taking a look at the same graphs, but in Sound just exemplifies higher noise levels, and it compacts these lower noise levels. I have a whole video on my channel about Sound versus decibel systems, so you can watch that if you're really curious. But here it is.
42% noise nonetheless.
Now we're on to performance through my cooler, specifically the Noctua U12A. First, we have the left graph here. We have RPM versus airspeed. It's basically a blade efficiency graph. And on the right side, we have decibels versus meter per second, and that's basically a noise efficiency graph. So in terms of blade efficiency, it's actually doing pretty well. It matches very closely to my control fan, as well as the reverse blade trans warp fan. When we take a look at its noise efficiency, it doesn't really compete at the same level as my control fan, which is the same control fan as the previous test, where it's 3 parts 812x5 to 1 part 814. So that would really be a top echelon fan to compete against as my control fan. And as a data point to kind of show my point, this is decibels versus meter per second comparing. Oh, there's no data label. Well, I apologize. My data label appears to have vanished. But the blue line was airspeed through my radiator, while the red dots, were airspeed through the air cooler, and they line up near on perfectly, which I'm not saying that the radiator and the heatsink, the U12A, have the same cooling potential. I'm saying that the airspeed going through it, so the restriction of how much it slows the airspeed down, are the same. So it means that the tests line up very closely, and I can say that if one is good for one, it's going to be good for the other. Taking a look at airspeed going through the cooler when compared to other fans, we got the fan name, we got the RPM at my noise normalized value 1, so approximately 11 decibels, and the RPM at my second noise level at approximately 18 decibels. And for that second RPM, the scores are just kind of averaged between 2 parts 11 decibels, 1 part the 18, and ranked that way, which is why you have some outliers, like the Apex Stealth has a really high ranking at 18 decibels, but kind of sitting almost in line with its, actually a little bit too high for its 11 decibel mark. So taking a look at the Starstone, it's doing okay for its kind of category. It's not a high performer, and it's honestly shifted towards the bottom. But it could work in a pinch, and if you're filling out your case full of radiators, it may not matter, but if you're using an air-cooled system, there probably is a better choice for you. Taking a look at normalized to 800 RPM, it is basically last, and this is how the fans were ranked, where the score was ranked 5 parts out of 6 for the airspeed performance and 1 part out of 6 for the noise performance, averaged together, blended. Next, we're taking a look at 1500 RPM, and the Starstone is rated towards the bottom, and even decimal point improvements in airspeed can have significant impacts on and unlock CPU maximum wattage, as seen by over here. And I have a whole video actually talking about this on my channel that's probably a couple years old at this point. So unfortunately, there are just better choices out there. But we're going to get into how it relates in terms of price, because it should compete pretty well in price, especially given the amount of RGB it has. The weighing factor is different on this one. As we move up in RPM, I stress a higher importance on airspeed as a differentiator, as opposed to noise. Here, it's competing with basically top-end fans that can spin at 2000 RPM. It technically, again, doesn't quite hit there, which is why it's towards the bottom of the pack, but the fact that it can even get close is pretty good, I would say. So it's something to consider. At 100% PWM fan signaling, this just lets the fans go full out. Again, compared to other fans that are similar around it, it's not particularly bad. For these more budget-focused fans, the outliers, I think, appears to be Thermalright with their TLS12, where I found it to be particularly good in the sample I received, and how the weighing factors were done on this section of the video as well. Now we have its noise efficiency. So right here we have the Starstone sitting right here, and it is shifted towards the bottom. You can see where the top end performance really are sitting, but compared to, again, the other fans that are kind of fundamentally similar to it, it's not doing particularly badly. So same thing in Zone. I'm going to leave it up for a couple seconds. Now on to my CFM test. This test is sort of funny in that fans either perform exactly as I would predict, or they completely go off the rails in a bad way, which is the trans warp down here. But the Starstone is performing as expected. And CFM testing is, you put a fan, you blow it down a tube, it doesn't allow air to expand off to the sides. So it means all fans should look almost identical in terms of CFM versus RPM. But that does not take into account noise. So we do see that them separating away from each other, where the Starstone is just not quite as noise efficient as my control fan. Taking a look at noise normalized values, very similar to the way the graph was in the air cooler. We got the fan name, we got the RPM, and we have the RPM at the second noise normalized value. So I apologize, apparently the Starstone was missing. I had to go back to the data and just kind of hack it in, but it would be roughly in the same position that you see here, where it's at 35.8 and 48.5. So overall the Starstone in this test is doing okay. At 100% PWM fan signaling, once again, its positioning makes a lot of sense. It's not really a high RPM fan, and it's sitting amongst other fans that have very similar RPM levels. In terms of its noise efficiency, it is shifted towards the bottom, but it's not in a terrible spot in it, so it's okay. Now on to value. So its retail value is $17. However, it's at time of filming on sale for $10, and I've listed out its value for that. So at retail, it's well towards the bottom. When it's at sale for $10, its value actually climbs to very middle of the pack. Matter of fact, for the amount of RGB lighting on it, you can't get a better value than this fan. There are fans that perform better than it empirically, but none have the same volume of lighting. So if the volume of lighting is a major criteria of yours, it's an excellent pick. If lighting is of no concern to you, then there are better options, particularly in bigger cases. Taking a look at CFM, in this test it did okay, and when we take a look at its reduced price, so improved value, it climbs substantially. It actually becomes high middle of the roads in terms of that value for this fan. So again, driving home the point, is RGB the high importance for you? Yes or no? In terms of putting it on a cooler, it's not really a cooler fan, so it doesn't perform that way, but that well overall. But again, it has a lot of lighting on it, and if you're not chasing the highest end performance or anything like that, it would do sufficient, it would do the job. So that brings us to the end of the video. This is my raw data. The raw data does belong to me. If you want to use it for your own personal use, you can go ahead and do so. But if you're going to use it in any sort of video, publication, written journal, anything like that, that it can be monetized, I do as they reference me and my channel, as I'm the one that works long and hard to produce this data. As a matter of fact, I'm now really taking a look at how long it takes me to do things. Testing is around 2 hours, and updating my graphs and charts takes like 3, and then just making like presentations takes almost that long. So it's a large effort for me to publish my findings, not just sit there with my data to myself as a hoarder. Anyways, so if you like what I'm doing, like the idea of what this channel is doing, I'm always trying to improve. And if you would like to join me on this adventure, think about hitting that subscribe button. If you've got the monetary support, please think about joining me as a YouTube member or as a Patreon. And new to this channel now, I've added, for my higher tiers of membership, access to versions of my raw data, where one is just raw data and the other has my utility tools that I use for making graphs, so you can make your own graphs more easily, I guess. So if you're interested in joining me, I'm basically adding that as an incentive, or not incentive, a bonus for when you sign up. Anyways, what do I think about this fan? It's got a large RGB lighting. Personally, it's not my taste, but it has a lot of really great lighting features. I particularly like this inner lighting ring that illuminates the blades as opposed to the blade illumination. It's much more subtle. I feel like ICOLER could do other things to actually reduce the price of the fan a little bit more. Like the side the cable comes out, you don't really need RGB lighting on that side. It's not really doing anything back there because it's going to be just backed up against the computer case to begin with. So there are other things that I think that they could do to save a little bit more money to bring up the value of this fan just a little bit more, so it'd be a little bit more price competitive. But for the amount of lighting you're getting, I sort of understand that price. So as always with my videos, it's up to you where you want to spend your money. Is the fan great as an empirical pick for amount of airflow that it can produce? Unfortunately, no. But my testing doesn't include how good is the lighting, how much lighting does it produce, that kind of thing. So it produces a lot of lighting. Its lighting effects are pretty good. The mirror effect is very nice looking. So it's up to you to decide what is the most important feature, and I just try to present the data as best as I can to allow you to make a informed decision. Anyways, thank you very much for joining me here on Computer Tech and More. If you got questions, I'm always in the comment section, or I have a Discord, and you can chat with me there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.